Before we get started, make sure you subscribe to this channel. That way, when I release more videos like this, you'll get notified.
So welcome to the show, Joy. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here, Betsy. Thank you for inviting me.
So before we get into all the details around how consultants and coaches could take their storytelling game to the next level, I'd love to back up and talk a little bit about you and your career and what your business is all about.
Sure. Thank you so much. So, my business is about helping professionals to move from a productivity mindset, a mindset of just hashing things out and sort of trying to rise the corporate ladder, to being people who are tapped into the fact that we're born creators and we have unique gifts and contributions to make, and encouraging people to create with their gifts, create either a product, a service, an experience, or a project, because I believe that's what our work really is and what we're here to do. Our real work is not our job or our career, it's what we create. And that's the overarching mission I believe that we all have. So I'm really intrigued by what that looks like for individual people, and all my work is about helping them to do that and to get there. And what I found and what sort of often gets people stuck is the stories that they tell and the narratives that are running in their heads and that we sort of live with. And so that's sort of like the lead in and another aspect of my work in the coaching, storytelling coaching, and using it as a device, both to help people use it to be better in their work, but also as a developmental tool for growth and getting to being better and greater creators. So that's what Reframe to Create is about. And
So
yeah.
interesting. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a lot in there.
Yeah. So I have like three different ways that I want to go with you on this one because they're all equally interesting paths for us to talk about. I love the idea of creating and that being a key element of our career. And I think that's really important for consultants and coaches because we have to, really craft our own path or our own place on the org chart. There's no really a formal place. So I want to talk to you about that. So that's one thing I heard you say. The second is the internal narrative. And that's a foundation of your ability to kind of create your own position in the market, but also being an effective storyteller. And then, of course, what we want to talk about is how do you create these stories? So is it okay if I go with you on all three of those directions?
Let's do all of those. Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about this whole idea of our job isn't necessarily about productivity, but about creating, and specifically speak to my audience of consultants and coaches who are really creating their own businesses. They're creating their own place on the org chart. How does that work?
So I think they already probably know and had that inkling, because a lot of times consultants or independent entrepreneurs probably came, not all, but came out of the 9 to 5 world, came out of a world where they were in jobs or careers that might not have had very prescribed, dictated paths, but there was sort of a sense of this is what you do, you get this certification, you get this degree, this is the path, this is what's expected, this is what success looks like. And in those spaces, we often have a sense of, but there's not that there's more in the space, but I have more. There's more that I want to give, and there's more that's different. And I feel like I'm a little bit of a box here. Like this doesn't quite fit. How does it all fit together? How can I express this or bring all the different things that I have together to create something new and different? So they already know this. They and a lot of people feel this and have this sense about it, and that often launches people off, whether they do it full time and leave and become full-time consultants and have their own businesses, or do it on the side. But there's this yearning to create something new, beautiful, that's really a reflection of who they are and how they are on the inside. So, and to do that, to be of service, to have an impact on the world in your own unique way. And so I applaud that, and I think that that's a right instinct that people have. And if people are doing that in any sort of small way, I always encourage people to continue doing that, because I think it's absolutely indispensable. No matter whether you're in a more structured setting or not, you have to find ways and spaces to express that. And the venue to me doesn't matter. Just the act and process of creating is what is important.
Yeah, so it's almost like if you're in a job, you don't have to be constrained by the box of your job title and your responsibilities. You could be an entrepreneur. You can take with initiative and maybe a little bit of moxie, you can make your job be what you want it to be. You can create within your organization. But it sounds like there's like also if like you start working on it from that standpoint, you might want to continue on that journey and be outside of that box. Is that what
Yes.
you see as a path that people typically go down?
Exactly, because I see it as being you're mission minded, and your mission is always to create. And as I said, you don't get stuck into, which is what I think a lot of people do, don't get stuck or distracted by the vehicle, by the box. You're in a 9 to 5 job, and you have a whole other passion. You try to introduce this thing in, you try to create some things in the space, and they're like, thanks, but no thanks. There's absolutely no room for that. That should not be the end of the matter for you. Provided that you're taking care of that's a whole other thing, taking care of yourself and managing your energy. It behooves you to find another space or venue for that somewhere outside. Maybe it's volunteer work. Maybe you start your side hustle, something else, but that mission is still important, and it still applies to continue to create with your gifts. And it doesn't have to be something that you make money from. That's the other thing. So I'm trying to help people distance themselves from all the excuses and things that get them stuck. Oh, it has to be in my 9 to 5 job. No, it doesn't. It can be outside of it. And you can still keep your 9 to 5 if you want to. You don't have to leave it. It's not either or. Oh, I have to figure out how to monetize this thing. If it's not monetized, I can't do it. No, that's not an excuse. Still find other ways to bring this into the world. It could be something that you do and give for free. So the venue doesn't matter, and whether you're getting paid for it or not doesn't matter. Those are all options and choices that are available to you. What is not, negotiable is to be about the mission of creating with your gifts.
I love that, because like you've just stated what I teach all the time about, like, take charge of your positioning, find a place on the org chart that you want, have a vision. But I like what you're saying even more, because it's more about like own your own mission wherever you are, own your own creative gifts and your own desires. And you stated even better of like why I actually left Disney to start my own business is I did that as an entrepreneur for years and years and years. I mean, I don't think I ever really, except for like maybe the first 5 years of my career when I was like an international HR person, I ever really stayed within the box anyway. But it was like, I can't stay within the box. I have to keep creating, and I have to keep going and doing my own thing. And I love the way you're talking about that, because it is that same mission. The only thing I would probably just say is like, but everything really actually is monetizable. I don't know if you would agree with me on that one. I was doing this little talk when my daughter was in 5th grade. I was doing one of those like teach-in kind of things where you talk about like, what do you do? The parents come in. And so I'm like, well, I help kids figure out, like I help grownups figure out what they want to be when they grow up. And so the way I described it, and all the kids were like horrified, but I brought something like a little treat for everybody in the group. And I had this basket. And I remember when I was in college, this kind of like stuck into my head is like when I was in college, there was a major for basket weaving. And I remember like, we're like, what are you going to do with basket weaving? And then I held this thing up. I'm like, well, I bought this basket. Somebody made money off of this. And it's like, and that's where it's like in my mind, it's like everything's monetizable. Everything is with smart strategy, because there's a need for everything in every creative gift or every vision or every mission that somebody feels in their heart. Would you agree with that? Or am I off on that?
No, I think so. I think if that's what people want and that's a possibility, I think what I'm cautioning people on is using the fact that they're stuck or not able to figure that out as a reason to not create.
Got it.
You still need to keep moving on and moving forward. And don't let that be a barrier. Maybe you'll figure it out. Maybe you'll eventually get to it. But if you're like, oh, I don't know how to monetize it, so I'm not going to do anything. No, that's not the mission that we're on. Like, still keep creating, because some things that you create, you may immediately figure out how to monetize, and others it may take a while. But either way, I'm trying to take away all the excuses that people are making for not creating with their gifts.
So that brings us to the second thing that I wanted to follow up with you on is the internal stories and the narratives, because it seems like that must be as a part of that internal narrative that would keep somebody from creating and forging their own path to what they want to do with their mission.
Yeah. So it's things like my job, everything is about the job or the career, and it has to fit in that box. It's things like, oh, I must be able to monetize it, or I can't move on, or if I don't want to be a business owner, so that's my only choice or my only option, I have to leave my job. Things like that keep people thinking about this in such a narrow way instead of broadly. You have gifts, you have talents, and there's something that you can do with that. The world needs you to create something with that and offer it in service. So I always say, create with your gifts and offer it in service to at least one other person. Because that's the other thing that gets people stuck. This idea of you got to go big or you got to go home. I got to be, if I can't be Oprah, I need to shrivel up like a tiny little worm and die in a corner, a silent death. And it's like, no, so that's why I say offer it in service to at least one other person. And even before that, I have something, called the CREATE framework, which is like all 6 of the letters stand for something, but the E stands for expressing your gifts for yourself. So even before you get to activating it for the world, which is A, and offering it to the world, just expressing it is valuable. Just you in your pottery room, creating your pottery pieces, even if none of them ever see the light of day, none of them ever get sold, that work is still important. It still matters. And so these are all the things that people sometimes suppress, the stories that they tell themselves, and they're like, oh, well, if I can't, if nobody likes it, I shouldn't do it. Or if I can't sell it, it's like, no, creating, to this is to me, creating is to the soul what breathing is to the body. You have to do it. It's such an important part of who you are. And so I really hope people can liberate themselves from all the stories they tell themselves about. These are all the barriers and reasons which I can't and shouldn't create, and just tell a better, bigger, and broader story that invites them to continuously be in that state, in that posture. And then so much can come from that. We just don't know. And that's part of the fun and the adventure of it. What will come from the things that you create.
So somebody might be listening and say, all right, cool. Somebody who wants to do pottery and art, I can kind of see those gifts. But like someone like my husband, who's a finance guy, who does not have like a crafty, creative bone in his body necessarily. No offense. He's a wonderful person, but he's very left brain. He loves data. He loves he does like genealogy on the side, and he does that for fun. I would probably say that is a creative expression in his way. He's not artistic, but he's super creative when it comes to figuring out like different people's genealogy, and he loves it and he's fascinated by it. Is that an example?
Well, that's another distinction I make, because I try not to use the word creative, because people have a narrow view of what creative and creativity is. They think the creative people are the people who do art or who dance or who act or, do pottery. And that's why I always talk about create. It's a verb, the act of bringing something to life and creating experiences. So someone who is really into data and is able to bring the data together and share insights, even in a conversation, is creating an experience with another person as their potentially a learning experience. So you create experiences, you can create a project, you can create a product, you can create a service. And it's all about the verb, the act of creating. And, engineers create, data scientists create.
Very much.
And
they create.
Scientists create, it's not just, dancers and authors who create. So I believe that this is just an integral part and a natural part of being human. And so we have all these things that we say like, oh, well, I'm not creative. And it's like, no, fine. Okay. People are like, oh, I'm not creative. I'm not even going to fight people on that. I'm just going to ditch the whole word and say, okay, but you do create. And so that's what I'm talking about. Keep creating.
Yeah. So you may not be an artist, but you're creative in your own ways. Like one of my favorite initiatives that I witnessed when I was at Disney was this pricing strategy reinvention, where they took like single day tickets or multi-day tickets and they turned it into this whole package thing. And it was like super creative in terms of like being outside of the box, and it's like totally reinvented the way we thought about things, or I look at the industrial engineers. I love them. My word's obsessed with the industrial engineers at Disney who figured out like how to do fast passes and all these other things. And I think that that's such a key thing, is using whatever your gifts are to create experiences. Or like with my husband, who's obsessed with data, we went on a long walk this weekend and he knows all the history where we just moved to. We just moved to Denver. And he told me story after story. And it's like, okay, it was interesting, in his way. It created an experience. It wasn't just a walk. It was like a little historical tour of my brand new town. And I like the way that you're talking about that.
It's so natural. It's natural to us. And part of it is reminding people that you're already doing this. This is already who you are. And it's just about raising your awareness to be more intentional about doing it more.
That's literally what I was just going to ask you. It's like, well, how would somebody find out like what these gifts are in their creative expression in their way? How would they figure that out? And I think what you're saying is notice it. Is there other tips that you would give someone to bring more intentionality to creating from their own gifts?
So there's something I do, and this is more for professionals or folks who have a resume, which I call it a resume excavation. And I have people go through their resume and look at all the things that they created, things that they initiated, that sort of they were like, this is a great idea. I want to do this thing. And to have them go through the experience of finding all the ways in which they've come up with projects, they come up with services. They've come up with these different experiences, and what are the things that they lean towards that they love to do. You can also ask people in your community, ask your friends, ask people like, and this is asking an experiential question, which is, what is it that I tend to create when we're together or when we're in a group of friends, or what type of experience do I tend to create? Because that tends to be what we, do in groups. We're usually creating experiences, but not always. You might be, creating products or bringing people together for certain things. So being more observant, obviously, but just sort of following the breadcrumbs in your own career. What are the things that you naturally created in your role, but also off to the side because you just couldn't help yourself, or you just spontaneously were like, oh, I want, to bring this thing to life. But then also ask other people around you. They're great observers of this. What are some things that you've seen me create over the years that you've known me? And hear what it is that they say. And there might be some things that are surprising, but a lot of times it'll be confirmation of who you are. That's what it was like for me when I switched into this new career of coaching. I had a colleague. I mean, there were a lot of different breadcrumbs along the way, but a colleague of mine, kept telling me like, you really manage our boss really well. Like you manage up really well. He's like, you should totally be a coach. You've coached me. But for a long time, people kept saying, you're a coach, you've coached us and all this stuff. And so when I got to a point where I wanted to do, and I was frustrated and I wanted to do something else, I asked myself that question, what would it look like for me to be paid to be myself? What would it look like for me to just, this is me. What does me in a profession look like? And I twirled around with it, and then I just came back to, I'm like, they've told me this. They've told me this for years. And I was like, oh, it's being a coach. And then I went to get my certification. So the entire coaching certification journey, I felt that I was just getting the tools to professionalize who I already was. It wasn't something new. It was really enhancing and strengthening who I already was. So the breadcrumbs are already there. So it's just following the trail.
Can you say that one sentence again about getting paid for yourself? Like again and slowly, so like the audience could really
Yeah.
take in the sentence of like what this means.
Yes. So I was stuck in my career, and I was watching a boss who was so passionate and excited about everything that he was doing every single day. And I wanted that. And so I knew I got to a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I need to go on some journey of self-exploration. And the question that I asked myself was, what would it look like for me to be paid to be myself? And, weeks, months, not up to a year, but just of having that question swirl around in my head and asking it again and again and again, I eventually, you know, the answer dawned on me, as I put all the pieces together from what others had been telling me and what I discovered about my natural leaning was becoming a coach. And so I think that's a great question for other people to sit with and sink into. What would it look like for me to be paid to be myself?
I love that. Like, so to me, like there's three things that I would probably draw out of this as it relates to the narrative that you tell about yourself and what's possible. So one of the things that I have my clients do during my brand messaging program is ask people, what am I best at? What do I do that's unique compared to other people? But I think what you're adding is a very different question that is even more powerful is the question is, what is it that I create? what have you observed me create? That's the question. So that would be application 1 for those who are listening, is really think about that and start asking people that question. Seems like the second thing is really paying more mindful attention to all the breadcrumbs, throughout your own life. I probably just add in, it's like whatever brought you energy, whatever brought you joy, pay attention to that. But the real kicker that I would encourage everybody who's listening in is to take in this question around, what would it look like to get paid to be who I am? Like that's powerful. Like that's like, one of those, like if Oprah, we talk about Oprah, like, like tweet this, if I were Oprah, which I'm not,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's such a powerful phrase. Love that. So, okay, so let's continue on, because speaking about,
Can I add something to that? And I want to
Sure.
remind people about, when you ask that question, to remember that the answer is not tied to a particular venue.
Oh yeah.
Right. So when you say be paid to be myself, it doesn't necessarily be paid through a job or paid through a career. There's so many different ways to be paid, so many different ways to take in income and make money. And it could be all of the above, or none, or some. So that's the other thing not to get stuck in. What would it look like to get paid to be myself? Not necessarily paid by a job or career or business, but just paid.
Right.
See what that looks like.
And the key is to be myself. Like,
Yeah.
it's not this fake version of what you think authenticity is. I think that that's one of those things that are out there right now with authenticity, is we think that we have to say like, hey, look at you being all smart and stuff. It's like, well, yeah, that's authentic if that's how you talk. But if you don't sit there and do finger pistols and say, look at you being all smart and stuff, that's not authentic.
Yes.
It's being yourself or whatever it is. One of the big moments for me in my latest rebranding is right before I did that, I got rid of all my suits because I hate suits and they always make me feel like I'm wearing a straitjacket. And it's like, but people said like, oh, but you're really good at like standing in front of a group of people and you could get executives to be on alignment and all of that. I'm like, yeah, but why do I have to wear suits? And my daughter, she was doing something for my birthday shortly thereafter. And she gave me like this picture of Elle Woods. And she's like, I love that you are going to command a boardroom in a pink dress, and this whole idea of like being yourself, like you could command a boardroom as yourself, and you could do all of these things as yourself. So I love that. And that's such a huge thing. But speaking of as yourself, one of the things that I noticed about you that you turned my head, there's so many things that you talk about that turn my head, but we were in a workshop together and you were sharing about how to tell stories. And it was like riveting on the edge of my seat. It's like, my gosh, this woman is like unreal with storytelling. And I know that you're pivoting a lot of your coaching to be doing more of the storytelling coaching. Can you talk a little bit about how you discovered like storytelling, how you moved from like, I'm just really good at it, to being more conscious? That it's like, hey, wait a minute, storytelling is a big one of these breadcrumbs.
Yeah. So the unconscious piece was just, just doing it every day and just being how I talk. And also it being the water of the world of social justice and policy advocacy that I lived in. Storytelling was such an integral part of everything that we did, in addition to narrative building. So before I got into being a coach and into what I'm doing now, I was in, access to essential medicines movements or online privacy movements. And everything about what we did was changing and shifting the narrative of these movements and telling individual stories that would support movement through that. But we never spoke about it in those terms, and I never really consciously saw and observed it in that particular way. So I started working at a financial institution, and I got a project from my boss, which was a storyteller video series that had been around, but had sort of, been paused for a while, and they needed someone to take it back up. And this was a video series with our senior leaders, and my role was to coach them and support them in unearthing and crafting their stories to share for the videos that would go out enterprise-wide. And the rest is history. That was just a new venue and a new packaging for me discovering that this was a unique talent of mine and something that I was really good at. I was like, oh, I'm good at really helping them get to a point where they're able to dig into a personal side and aspect of them and unearth the meaning of that, help them make new meaning of it, and then deliver it in a story form, and then work with the digital media team to, package it and, and into a video and then share it enterprise wide. And the response was quite phenomenal and riveting. People were really excited and often shared a lot of comments, and really just a culture shift in our organization of how people saw and see our leaders, and the expectation of how much vulnerability and how much gets shared. And then it just sort of became the vehicle that I started using for all my coaching. So I saw it as, it's not just about the end product of telling a story, but there's something that happens to the storyteller in the process of unearthing and crafting their story. It's a transformational journey that they go on in the process of getting to this so-called end product. And it really is the transformations that we look to bring to our clients in coaching. So it was a perfect marrying of my executive leadership coaching and with storytelling as a tool to bring folks through this particular transformation. And then I couldn't get enough of it, right? So I was like, okay, how could I do this in other ways and spaces? So I, it got connected with and thought out and worked with, as you know, Carol and Diane at Speaking Your Brand. I do storytelling and speaking coaching with them. I also do storytelling and teaching and speaking with a Story District, which is the leading storytelling organization in Washington, D.C. And so for me, that's the way that I'm living out my mission of creating experiences, right? I'm not limiting myself to one organization. I'm like, oh, this is a talent. This is a gift. This is something that I create with my gifts. What are all the different ways and spaces that I can do that? And it's been something that's just yielded so much joy and so much insight and, so much fulfillment for me. And I think also for my clients.
Yeah, impact, I would definitely say. I mean, I still remember the story that you shared in the workshop that we were together, and because it's like it resonates. So I want to follow up on one of the things that you said around the connection between the story that the storyteller says and the transformation of your clients. Because I know that that's a key element, but I know it's been a journey to get to that mindset, because I always believe that what I bring to the table is like, hey, I'm an organization development consultant and I have all these years of experience and I got a master's degree and I worked at Disney. Or and a lot of my clients think it's like, it's about our credentials, or coaches in particularly. They get trained very much, like, especially through ICF, it's like, it's about the process, and I'm not a person. I'm just like a mirror for the client, like I'm just there, and how would you bust some of those beliefs to say, no, there's a connection between your story as a transformation agent and the transformation that you're going to create with your clients? What's the relationship?
Well, it's a journey, and it's about connection, right? So we learn together, we journey together, and who you are matters. And there's something I always say, I was like, you can never go, you can only go as far as who you are. Who we are, our identity, and where we are at this particular moment is what makes us the type of consultants or coaches that who we are. We're not interchangeable. We're not replaceable. So the way that you journey with your clients and who you are at that particular moment that you're journeying with them has a direct and powerful and connected impact on the type of journey that they'll have, and what the level of vulnerability they'll be able to have with you, and how far they'll be able to go, and who they'll be able to become, and how they'll be able to shift in the time that they work with you in order to get to the end of whatever it is that they want. Because, we create from who we are, wherever we are at that particular point in time. And so it's not this distant or disconnected thing. It's not just about, oh, your skills and your talents and all those things are tools that you have in your hand. But if you think about it, it's like, doctors are human beings. They're unique. They all go to medical school. At least I hope they do. They all go to medical school, right? Your doctor. I hope your doctor went to medical school.
Fingers crossed.
Right? Yeah. They've gone to medical school. They've acquired these skills and these tools, but those are things in their hands. You wouldn't just go, to someone who is holding a scalpel and be like, oh, you know how to hold a scalpel. You're good. Like, you're like, no, it's like, it's the whole person, but it's not just the learning that they got from school. It's also their empathy and their bedside manner and all those things. Like, there's just so many things that go into making us who we are, which makes for the type of things and experiences that we're able to create. And so it's all of those things. Those things can't be split apart or separated.
What is it about a story though that creates more of the stage for a bigger transformation in somebody else than just facts, data, methodologies, tool, all those tools in the toolbox? Like, what is it about story that is such, you mentioned it through your social justice
Yeah.
and that creates change. What is it about story that's so powerful?
Well, I mean, we could possibly get into the neuroscience of it, but it's like stories are, the way that human beings come to understand the world and make meaning in the world. It's such a fundamental way of who we are. It's how we connect, it's how we build empathy between each other. And there's this thing called neurocoupling. When you hear someone sharing a story, you experience and sort of like start to entrain to that person and build this sort of empathy and connection with them. So it's a very powerful experience. It's a very powerful modality because it really transports us into other experiences, other spaces, other ways of looking at the world. It's just this way that we're able to move and shift, and nothing else can do that in that same way for us. Like data doesn't do that. We're emotional beings, rationalizing our decisions that we've already made emotionally. It's not the other way around. And so story is that powerful device for it, but it's also the water that we live in. It's just such an integral part of being human and going deep to the depths of who we are. So when you hear someone's story, you connect to them and they're able to have an influence. They're able to influence you. And the word that some authors use is like sway you. And so that's the sort of like the power of story that sort of like bypasses other sort of like rational parts of our brains. But even for yourself, you when you go through the process of working on a story, unearthing a story and recrafting it, you're making new meaning. There's a process. You often are looking at things that you've already been through and have already experienced, and you're attaching new meaning to what those things are and what they mean. And that new meaning has the potential to open new doors of possibilities for you of looking at the world and then taking different action in a new way. So it really is a powerful way of moving and being in the world because our stories either limit us or set us free for something new.
So interesting because I kind of have a visual in my head around the three things that I wanted to talk to you about. Is it's kind of like a process, if you will. Is that if you are moving from like a corporate leadership job into like a consulting coaching business because you want to make a bigger difference, it really begins with that first thing that we talked about is like really becoming a creator of your own mission. And then it's like really taking on your own narratives because it's like because the change happens with your own narratives. And as you go through that journey, that is what you have to offer. And everything else is just a tool. Like people spend so much time worrying about the certifications, am I asking the right questions and all those things, but it's the story. And when I work with my clients through the brand messaging and positioning, the last thing we work on is their stories and what I tell them is like, people are going to want to know this stuff anyway. So you should be prepared. So when people ask you like, so what are you up to now? Like, what do you do? They don't really want, more titles. Like they want a story. Like, oh, well, like the way I teach is like, so when people are struggling with this is what I do. This is the value. And then the other big question is, well, why would you ever leave corporate to start your own business? And you should be ready. And I'm sure there's other stories. Like what tips would you give to someone who wants to get better at not telling people what they do, but telling the story about what they do, or telling the story about why they do it, or just telling the story in the course of their conversations with their clients? Like, how do they get better at it?
Well, one of the most important things to remember is that the personal is universal. And so people are often hesitant to share their stories because they're like, "Oh, well, this is so personal to me. It's not relevant to other folks." And it is. That personal story, your personal experience is universal because you're probably taking them into a story about your fears, your feelings of stuckness, and those are things that people can connect with and reflect on and connect in within themselves, and that's going to build your credibility and your influence with them because they're like, oh, they get it because they've seen this and they've experienced it as well. And so first getting comfortable and remembering and understanding the value of your story, that the more personal you're making it, the more people will be able to connect with it rather than less. And then storytelling is about bringing people into specific moments. It's about bringing us into a specific scene. It's not about giving me the broad overarching arc of like, well, when I was 5, this happened. Then when I was 6, this happened. Then when I was 7. That's not a story. You're giving, you're sort of like walking me through the long resume of your life. But a story, really, the power of it is bringing me to a specific moment. So just sort of saying like, when I was 17, one day, I was, where were you? What, when were we, in the story, and who was there? You, which other person, what was said, what happened, what were the feelings, what were the emotions, really bring us into the moment and bring us into a single scene. And then you can step back and reflect on it. And so what I learned from this is this. And what I get from this is this particular thing. So that's the other thing, that it's not about telling your entire life story and all the different moments, but picking a particular moment and then drawing lessons from it, because it's too overwhelming. It's too distracting to try to do everything and all the moments. Bring us to a specific moment, a specific space, a specific place, and, give us that microscopic view with as many details as possible, and then talk about what you learned from it and what we can learn from it as well.
So let's pretend that I'm a former colleague of yours and we used to work together in some corporation and now we run into each other. And I'm so curious, like, what in the world are you up to? How would how would you tell me, like, can you give me an example of a story of like how you can engage me into whatever it is you're doing now about the storytelling coaching and what you do in your business? But can you give me an example, like how you would do that? So like, let's say, like, start
Yeah.
scene. Hey, Jordyn,
Yeah.
it's been so great since we worked at ABC and Company. I haven't seen you in so long. What are you up to? What do you do now?
So I would go to, and I will just preface this, I would go to my origin story. So I would take you to that moment. I would go to the moment of being in the office with at my previous job. So I would say, hey, Betsy. So remember, yes, we haven't seen each other for a long time. So I don't know if you remember this, but one of the on the last afternoon that you left our job, and I was so sad, and I was in the bathroom and I was crying that you were leaving. I I was in tears, and I just felt this overwhelming sense of I just didn't know what was going to happen next, and I wanted to experience what I knew you were off to and about experiencing. So I came out of the bathroom, and Jen and Joe were sitting around the table as well. I think they were eating, they were always having their afternoon snack, and coffee. And I sat down, and they were like, Jen was like, "What's the matter, Joy? Like, you seem a little distraught." And I said, "Betsy's gone, and this is going to be a completely different experience for us from now. But I want to have what she has. I want to figure out how I can be paid to be myself." And they looked at each other and they're like, "Oh, there she goes again, doing her usual thing." And then they got up and they left. But I sat down and I started writing notes in my book. And I spent months and months after that thinking through that moment, thinking through what that would look like and mean for me. And many years later, I got my coaching certification, and I started this work in this job that I've been in now. And now I work with clients who I love working with and who love to do the storytelling work with me. And it's been absolutely great and amazing. And I would love to share more about it with you as well going forward.
Ooh,
So that's how I
awesome.
would do that.
And scene.
So I would,
Yay.
right? So do all the parts. I would bring you to a moment, and I, just kind of made that up, try to give you some imagery of me being in the bathroom, crying. That didn't happen, but and then Joe and Jen, so and then they're at the table, they're having coffee, just trying to flesh out the scene a little bit so that you guys can, because I'm trying to bring you into the moment, and I'm trying to bring you into the words that are being said and bring you into the thoughts that are being thought in that moment, in that time. But then I quickly, moved on and said, then I went and this was the answer and I moved on. But I didn't make everything bad, but I found a particular moment to try to bring to life. So you don't have to have many moments, but you have to have at least one. And it doesn't have to be a long moment either, but at least one moment for a particular period of time. And then you can build on that and sort of like, cascade on from there. But we definitely need those moments to be, that's what captures us. That's what captivates, that's what transports us. And that's how you build influence.
So it's not like, oh, okay. Like, so if I were going to tell my story, it's like, oh, well, my dad died and it was like sort of a wake up call. And then I decided to leave Disney. Like, that's not the story because I'm just giving the facts. It would be
Yes.
like, there was a moment, like, I'll never forget the moment when, And I might go in, I can't even do it off the top of my head. Like, I'll never forget the moment when I decided to leave Disney. I was at XYZ place and this is the moment. And then this came up, and then Joe and Sally were around me and they're like, why are you crazy? That makes no sense.
Or you could do the moment of hearing it, because you mentioned your dad dying. You could do the moment of getting a phone call, or where you were, or being in, or a hospital scene, or a conversation, and what that meant and what that impacted to you. Because we want to see emotional sort of transformation a little bit, like the moments that kick things off possibly is an option. So you could do from there and then say, this was the thing that shifted things for me. And then I went on to do this, and that, all these things happened there. But it's like bringing us to whatever moment you reference, bring us to a scene. So even the scene, even if leaving Disney moment, were you at your desk? Or was there a conversation that happened a week before, or something that tipped you off, that you were like, then, maybe it's something that's innocuous, I was walking through the park, and Mickey, walked up to me. Someone dressed up as Mickey walked up to me, and like threw a peanut at my head. And I was like, this is it. I'm done with this place. I'm just making it up. But, when we have a moment or a scene, we need to just see something.
So it's like, I'm probably like a lot of what the people are listening. It's like, I don't know which scene to pick out, because I could tell you, like in my example, the moment that I just, that started the process that got me to leave Disney, which happened probably over a year later, is when I got back from the funeral and I had this conviction, like because when my dad died, it was like, this is it. There's no more, one life. And it's like, I'm going to the land of happy, healthy, and free, like that was like my conviction. But it's like, it didn't get to a fruition later. So I could talk about like the moment he died, or I could talk about that. I could talk about that final straw moment, which is a very different moment. But it's like, how do you pick the right one, or does it matter? It's just like, pick one, go with it.
Yes, pick one and go with it. That's the thing. There is no right moment, because those are all your stories, and you can eventually flesh out and build all of those stories, right? So that's why I think it's important for people to build a story bank. Like, just have like the practice of bringing yourself into a moment, the practice of using, so, and I think Carol has a great framework, the ideal framework of how to tell a story, making sure there's imagery, making sure there's dialogue, emotion, action, and then getting to the lesson. Just, you can do that with all the different moments that you want to in your life. Again, don't get stuck on there is the one, or what is the most transformational moment I've had in my entire life. No, it's not even that. So for example, here's something that I use often with clients when we're getting started working on storytelling. I share this story. So when I was 3, my mom dropped me off at the preschool Merriweather on the first day. And she drops me off, and, I scurried off and started playing with the other kids. She left for a couple of hours and she came back. So when she came back, she met the woman at the front and she said, "Hi, I'm here to pick up my daughter, Joy." The woman looks at her clipboard and she's like, "There is no child here by the name of Joy." My mom, eyes darting, like, "What do you mean? I just dropped my daughter here earlier today." She's like, "There's no kid here by the name of Joy." So my mom's scanning the room, starting to panic, and she sees me in the corner playing with some other kids. And she's like, "Woman, what are you talking about?" "There she is right there. That's my daughter, Joy." And the woman looks over and then she laughs and she's like, "Oh, that's Dunstanette." And my mom's like, "What?" She's like, "That's Dunstanette." So my mom comes over to me. She's like, "What? Like, what in the world? What's going on?" So the adults are trying to figure out what's happening. And after a while of unearthing what's going on, they figure out, oh, I had gone and told everybody that my name was Dunstanette, my name was Joy, all the kids, all the teachers. And why would I do something like that? Because my dad's name is Dunstan, and I'm a daddy's girl. And I absolutely adored him, still adore him to today, and wanted to have a name that was as close as possible to my dad. So it's now a running family joke. Other family members, some people, when they want to tease me, they'll call me Dunstanette, but that's like a story. It's like family lore right now of like young Joy changing her name when she had the opportunity. So I use that story, and it's not that deep. It's a funny story. It's not, I'm not sharing my deepest, darkest secrets. It's probably not even the most significant moment in my life, but I could easily tack on to the end of that many possible lessons. So I could go with the importance of names, the importance of the names that we use, and what does that mean to us, and our sense of an identity. I could build a whole talk on it. Or what would you pull out from that story, right? Or you could ask the audience, like, well, what do you guys get from the story, and what do you learn from it? That's story banking, just going through these different moments, practicing sharing and telling the story and then realizing that there are endless possibilities of lessons that you potentially could pull from it. So it doesn't have to be these deep, significant moments or traumatic moments, but just moments.
So it sounds like from what you're saying then is storytelling establishes your credibility because it really taps into, from a neuroscience standpoint, a connection that may not be conscious, and that it's more powerful than just sharing your credentials or your ideas. The second is, it sounds like story isn't necessarily about like, oh, let me just tell you all my facts about all the horrible things that happened to me. It's about picking specific moments in time that can be universalized into other kind of principles and different kind of things. So it's like picking out the relevant story. And then the third is, there's no right story. Just get an arsenal of stories and just start working on creating the narrative around like that particular moment. So it's not about revealing everything. It's like that particular moment, and then you can be more flexible.
Yes, exactly. There's so many different options.
So, okay, so let's talk about you and your storytelling coaching. How do people get a hold of you, and how do they find you, and what kind of services do you offer?
So they can reach me through my website, reframetocreate.com, or emailing me, joy@reframetocreate.com. And I offer one-on-one storytelling coaching, but I also offer storytelling workshops for groups. So this is, groups who want to, maybe they have a cohort of people who they want to help them build and strengthen their storytelling skills. There are a lot of different frameworks that I take groups through to use storytelling for whether it's for movement building, which is sort of more, I would use more our work around narrative building. I would sort of, and this is the thing, there's a distinction between story and narrative, which I learned from Guillaume Viatra, who has this organization MetaHelm and does work around strategic narrative, which I love, which is sort of like the stories have a beginning, middle, and an end. They're set in a particular moment, but that narrative has a beginning, a middle, but no end. And that's what invites people to participation. So when you're building movements, or you're sort of inviting people to participate and make sort of social change, you really want to build and craft strong narratives. But stories have a role to play in supporting and sort of lining and being parts of those narratives. So for organizations, I would probably do work around, if they're social justice minded or mission minded organization, helping them craft their narrative and also the stories that they would need in support of that. And with individuals, helping individuals unearth and craft their story for connection and influence, especially leaders or however folks want to use it. If they have talks that they want to go to and develop in other ways. So those are my two audiences: groups and individuals.
Well, it seems like, though, in the whole, though, it's for people who are transformation agents, people who want to make a difference in the world, and leveraging the power of storytelling to make a bigger difference in the world, whether it's working with
Yes.
individuals or social movements. It's both. And you're the person
Yeah.
who can help people ignite change in the world because they are able to connect with their own story, connect with their own mission, connect in with their own reframing of their own stories, so that they can go out and make a bigger difference in the world.
Yes. And the difference they're going to be making is through the things that they create.
Yes. Oh my gosh, so powerful. So, is there anything else that you'd want to tell me about storytelling, or about living like a purpose-driven life, or having a purpose-driven business or career? And I'm just not asking you the right question.
Well, I really want the audience to understand that they're already doing this and they already are this. This is not something that's so different and foreign to them, but it happens to me as well. When someone says, "Tell me a story," there's something in my brain that seizes up, and I'm a storytelling coach. So if that happens to me, I understand that it happens to everyone, and there's just something about that that just gets us. We sort of fall off the bike. But we were already riding the bike. It's like you're riding the bike and someone says, "How do you ride a bike?" And then you're like, and then you fall
I
off
don't know. Yeah.
for some strange reason. But you were literally just riding the bike 5 minutes ago. And I see this happen all the time with my clients. Like I'll ask them, like, "Okay, let's talk, let's do the story." And then they get stuck. But once they hit a particular groove and they stop thinking about telling a story, they naturally just settle into a storytelling mode. And then I go back and see how you did that. You did dialogue, you did character, you did all these things. So you already know this. You already know how to tell stories. You already are telling stories. You already know how to create. You're already creating. It's just about working with someone who's going to help you build your bank of creating things that you create, and also your stories to help you be more intentional and powerful and impactful with what it is. You're already this, it's nothing new. I'm just going to help you be more of who you are.
Love that. Well, I can't add anything more to that. Thank you so much, Joy. You are a joy. This has been really powerful. I've learned so much. So thank you so much for being on the show.
And thank you so much for having me. These have been great questions, and I've enjoyed being here and chatting with you and getting to know your audience.
Thank you so much. Talk soon.
All right, take care.